We need a 2. 10 in the next 2 minutes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Swain's first ever virtual discussion series, Let's Talk, with today's topic revolving around diversity, inclusion, and our institutional stand against systematic racism, both within our country and its trickle-down effect within our school. My name is Veronica Boshin. I have been a faculty member at Swain for the past 5 years, and I am honored to be moderating today's symposium. Today, we are braving this conversation with honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to embrace the discomfort that will inevitably arrive throughout our dialogue. We ask everyone joining to bring an open heart and mind throughout our program, as our only mission is to continue Swain's inclusive culture for our students and to bring action awareness as we dismantle bias and prejudice through our own teaching, discussions, and examples. We would like to remind you that today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our website, swain.org. This is a closed webinar and you have been muted by the host. No one can see you or hear you, so you do not have to worry about interrupting the program. While there is the option to use the chat feature, we ask that you allocate any questions you have for our discussion by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you feel more comfortable asking questions anonymously, the Q&A box allows you to do so. First up on today's agenda, we would like to introduce Tyrone Russell. Tyrone is an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, member of Alpha Pi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, community advocate, and an award-winning higher education professional. Tyrone graduated from Colgate University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology. He also holds a Master's of Science degree in Counseling and College Student Personnel from Shippensburg University. Professionally, Tyrone has worked for numerous colleges and universities as an assistant director, a counselor, faculty, and program coordinator. He serves on a regional committee dedicated to constructing high school leadership conferences, conducts team building workshops for teachers and corporate staff, and designs and executes seminars and training for youth. Formerly serving as the coordinator of racial and ethnic justice with the Community Action Agency of the Lehigh Valley, and as the director of multicultural affairs at Lehigh University, Tyrone executes cultural realization sessions and equity training throughout the region for corporations and school districts, including Swain. Recipient of the 2017 African American Businessman of the Year Award presented by the African American Business Council of the Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce, Tyrone is the Chief Executive Officer of FACES International Marketing and Development, LLC, and president of the Cleveland School of Cannabis, a career school for cannabis education. Within our community, Tyrone is the proud father of 2 Swain students, Celeste and Naomi. Thank you for being here, Tyrone.
Absolutely. Is my mic okay?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So we're talking a little bit about race and racism today, and I'm excited to engage in this dialogue. So first, I want to thank Swain for truly living up to its mission throughout these very, very difficult yet necessary times. We are at the forefront of an American revolution, and we need leadership from government, from our nonprofits, from our for-profit businesses, and most importantly, from those in our education system. I believe Swain has been insightful, aware, attentive, and visible. And for that, no matter how difficult it may be to stand on the side of truth and justice, I believe this school has done its best to answer the call. And I am a proud member of this community. We have a lot of work to do, be it internal, be it external. But I'm confident that we have our sleeves rolled up and our minds primed to see not only the ugliness of our world or our institution, but we are prepared to experience the more rewarding aspects of the beauty in seeing people as they are in the skin that they are wrapped in. Serving as advocates and allies of those who exist in our global community, it won't be easy due to both intentional and unintentional ignorance, but I believe that we will prevail. So thank you. Race and racism. Race, a group of persons related by common descent or heredity, a population so related. In America, we equate race to skin color, and typically 2, white or black. Racism, a belief or doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement, usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to others. A policy, system of government or governance based upon or fostering such a doctrine of discrimination. In the United States of America, we've boiled it down to 2, white and black. White being the center of America and black being in the margins. Sometimes it's hard to think about white being in the center, and sometimes it may be difficult to see when you in fact are at the center. But I'll ask you to do an activity with your family and friends right now to help illustrate exactly what I mean. So if you can, take a quick second to grab a sheet of paper, and if a sheet of paper is too far away or a pen is hard to find or a pencil is hard to find, let's just do it in the air, right? So we can imagine that we have a huge sheet of paper in front of you. And what I want you to do is with your finger or with that pen is to draw a large circle, right? A circle large enough to draw a smaller circle in the middle. So once you draw that large circle, you can do it with your finger. Inside of that large circle, I need you to draw a smaller circle. Now, inside of that smaller circle, what I need you to do is to start to list a few things for me. And again, if you haven't found a sheet of paper, don't worry, you can think about it in your head. I want you to write all of the names of positions that folks who run our country hold. For example, I want you to write things like governors, CEOs, superintendents, senators, state reps, etc. So do that for me. Write all of the names of the positions that people hold that really make decisions for our entire community, for our entire nation. Again, governor, CEO, superintendent, senator, state reps, so on and so forth. Just list a few. I'll give you about 5 seconds. Now I want you to think, right, as you're listing and you're finishing off the last few. I want you to think about the demographics of the folks who hold those positions, right? Just think about the demographics, and I'll explain to you what I mean in just a second. So you have your governors, your police chiefs, your wardens, your state reps, your senators, so on and so forth. Now I want you to think about a few things. What is the gender of most of the people holding those decision-making positions? The people who lead our country. What is their outward-facing sexual orientation? And I say outward-facing because there are a lot of people who are hiding their true sexual orientation due to fear. So I say outward-facing because that's what they're showing us. Are those people experientially educated, meaning they may have a high school diploma, but they learned a lot through everyday life and just living? Or are they formally educated, graduates of college or beyond? What is their age? What is their race? You see, the core of our country and everything dominated within this country has heterosexual, formally educated, Christian, middle-aged white men at its center. And the closer you are to that center, the more access you have because the more like the center you are at the core. If you look through history, the center hasn't really swayed too far from its origin, which should tell us that there is something else working here. Because more women are educated today. In fact, Black women are the most educated population in our world. But how often do we find them at that center of decision-making positions? I mean, they have the education. We can consider them middle age or at the age where they're ready to take off in their careers. We can't see their sexual orientation unless we ask, and that's actually illegal, right? So what could it be? Well, we can say, well, it's the men that are in charge. So it's gender, it's not race. But we know the fastest growing population in leadership roles in corporate America and the dominant voice in our local nonprofit arena is white women. So what else could it be? We intimately need to know racism, even if we never admit it. Racism, a belief or doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement, usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to others. A policy, a system of government or governance based upon or fostering such a doctrine of discrimination. In the US, we broke it down to two: white and Black. White supremacy and Black inferiority. And that center begins to permeate everything we experience. That racism and white supremacy and white centeredness controls our everyday lives and beliefs. It's the air we breathe. After all, anecdotally, how many of the people on this call have had a white coach, a white teacher, a white mentor, a white supervisor, a white group partner, a white coworker, a white mayor, a white superintendent, a white principal? Now, how many of you have had a Black or brown person serve in any of those roles of influence in your life? My guess is that the numbers are very slanted. Every single person on this call has been led by the center, by white. Race, a group of persons related by common descent or heredity, a population so related. In America, we equate race to skin color, and typically two: white or Black, with white at the center and Black at our margins. There are several reasons as to how we arrived here, and I'll just share a few with you. The first, race has gone from strategic economic positioning and separation to real beliefs of supremacy and inferiority. For example, one teacher who reflected on Brown versus the Board of Education, which desegregated schools, and amongst other things, said when we asked to be desegregated, we asked because we wanted choice, not because white schools were better or Black schools were less than. We wanted to go to a school across the street, not the one 20 miles away. But if you read the findings of Brown versus the board, it seems as if the black kids wanted to go to white schools because those schools were better, stating essentially that black students needed access to better education. Now we watch the richest schools exist where white does, and rural where poor white does. And there is the belief that the teachers who teach in the Parklands or the Swains are better than those who teach in the ASD, or worse, that somehow these students aren't as bright. Teachers begin to believe it, parents begin to believe it, and what's worse, the students themselves who will become teachers and parents begin to believe it. The other thing is perpetuated through media, our living arrangements, our lack of proximity, our nurtured biases, the things we've learned. So these beliefs continue to fester because we have yet to engage authentically across race due to the wonderful design of racism and the winds of white supremacy. And I don't mean white supremacy in the reflection of KKK, but the kind that tells you somehow Dr. Seuss is a better writer than James Baldwin, or that the Titanic is a more relatable movie than Best Man Holidays, whose cast is predominantly black. I mean, we all have witnessed cancer before, but how many of us have actually been on a sinking cruise ship? Yes, racism and the racial divide somehow tells white folks they can relate to a drowning Leonardo DiCaprio far more than they can relate to a dying Monica Calhoun who is wrapped in black skin and dying of cancer while trying to hold her family together. Race and racism have become so nurtured in our souls that it almost feels natural to judge individuals by the color of their skin. We all begin to do it. But unfortunately for black people in America, the color of your skin can be a death sentence way before it becomes a letter of promotion. In order to fight racism, we must be just as intentional and aggressive in dismantling it as our forefathers were in its construction. We have to pass laws that remove legislation that allows for housing discrimination based on race. We need to write books about the lies told along color lines. We must hire faculty and staff of African descent to teach white kids and black kids so that the center of expertise is no longer simply white, be it male or female. There were no accidents in the Three-Fifths Compromise or in the placements of vagrancy laws and practices that still today will give a young black male 10 years for a crime that young white males commit on college campuses every single day. We must be just as intentional. The other thing is to understand that holding people accountable is not playing a victim. It is not a victim's game. It is the basis of change and growth. We must hold our institutions accountable. They have a responsibility to live up to their models. So when black folks come into an institution and they begin to hold it accountable, be it the government, be it a school, be it police departments, it's because we believe them when they say they stand for justice, equality, and fairness. So when Swain writes in our mission that everyone can be educated and there is a commitment to inclusion, and now we're moving to work towards anti-racism and decentering the center and bringing others out of the margins, then the people who love this institution have a duty to see that the school is living up to its purpose, be the student black or white. If we see someone not being treated as our community member, we are supposed to speak up, because rights violated for one are going to be rights violated for every single person listening in on this. And we have to carry that mantra into the space of race. But to take those steps, and I'll begin to close this out, we have to be able to do a few things, right? The first thing that we must do is understand that black people are beautifully diverse. All black folks are not the same. And aside from experiencing racism, we can and we do approach life differently. We must agree that there are people in the world. Number two, we must agree that there are people in this world that make decisions for others, right? Earlier, you drew a circle that illustrated the fact that we had a list of decision makers for our world that we live in. They make rules, laws, and create a world that's comfortable for them, regardless of the biases that they have when they're creating it. Which brings me to my next point. Every person in this world has biases, and many along racial lines. And these biases have never been interrupted. So people are walking around with uninterrupted biases in their daily lives. They were raised around folks who look like them, taught by folks who look like them, been pulled over by cops who look like them, taking care of doctors who look like them, and their pattern of experts who have been in their corner has never been interrupted, nor has their pattern or biases regarding race been changed. So finally, if you believe there are people who make decisions for others to follow, and you believe that everyone in this world has biases, many along color lines, then you must admit that the idea of white privilege exists at one end of the spectrum and disadvantages of being Black exist at the other end of the spectrum. Why? Because those who make decisions for others show up with their thoughts and biases to make their designs, and in there, the more like you are to them, the more likely you are to have access to their center, to the control, to the power and influence that others must follow, to the influence of law, the influence of curriculum, the influence of justice, and the influence of environmental design. If you believe those two things, people have biases and people ultimately get to make rules, regulations, laws, so on and so forth for others, then when they create that, they're creating those in the eyes of their biases uninterrupted. We must decenter whiteness if we indeed are going to take our steps towards anti-racism work. It's mandatory, and all of our children's lives depend on it. I am proud to be a part of the Swain community, and I'm proud to commit to this work alongside parents, faculty, staff, leadership, and most importantly, next to and on behalf of our Black and white students. Race, a group of persons related by common descent or heredity, a population so related in America. We equate race to skin color, and typically to white or Black. Racism, a belief or doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement, usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to others. A policy, system of government or governance based upon or fostering such a doctrine of discrimination. In the US, we broke it down to two: white and Black. White supremacy, Black inferiority. White at the center and Black in the margins. If we aren't ready to address these truths, we aren't ready to do the work. But I, for one, believe that we are as a Swain community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyrone, for sharing and all that you continue to do for the Swain community. That was really beautiful, and I have chills. Next up in today's discussion is our new head of school, Dr. Armistead Webster, to speak on behalf of Swain's leadership and action items as we move forward.
Thank you, Veronica, for moderating the town hall tonight, and my thanks, Tyrone, for your thoughtful and powerful words. I want to welcome everyone who's here and thank you for being part of this important conversation that I am proud Swain is having. I am new to Swain, but I already know what deep love and affection so many people have for this school and the community around it. So I'm going to talk from the first person point of view. As a white man in America, I have benefited from a system created by white men at the expense of people of color. Those are not words I would have said even a few years ago. So what has changed for me? I've recognized that one of the benefits, one of the privileges I have as a white person in this country is the choice of whether or not to engage with the fact of racism. If I choose not to think about race, then I can happily go through my day. It will not impose itself upon me. But if I were a person of color, and especially if I were a Black man in America, that choice would not be open to me. Therefore, I must make an affirmative commitment every day to work toward creating a society that is truly anti-racist. So those words are another thing that has changed for me. Anti-racist. That's not a phrase that I was comfortable thinking about or saying not too long ago. I've always been comfortable thinking of myself as someone who was not racist. I didn't hate people based on the color of their skin. Maybe once in high school I said something thoughtless to a Black classmate, but that was a long time ago. I read a lot about the history of race and racism in America. I'm not a racist. But then I realized this isn't about me as an individual. comfortably believing I'm not a racist. It's about recognizing that we live in a country that for centuries has created structures and systems that by design gave power to people who looked like me and kept it from people of color. Believing I am not a racist is an easy way out of confronting the systemic racism that we need to change. So here's one more thing that has changed for me. I'm not real comfortable saying what I just said, and especially not in front of an audience, including people I've never even met. Using terms like anti-racist or white privilege or systemic racism. But if I'm not willing to speak those words, then what will change? If I'm not uncomfortable, what will change? As a white man, if I don't address these issues, what will change? We've been a long time getting to where we are today, and I hope our town hall tonight is part of a shorter journey to bring our country to a place where every American can live their life without the burden of systemic racism and with the hope and promise we all hold on to. Thank you, and thank you for being part of this conversation and for joining with us as we translate the words we speak into actions collaboratively and together. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Webster, for speaking on behalf of Swain's stance. We have one last speaker before we open up the floor for Q&A and discussion. So I'd like to introduce our Director of External Relations and Secondary School Placement, Karen Matan.
Good evening. Thank you to Veronica and everyone else who has enabled this evening to happen. As Veronica said, my name is Karen Matan, and I am very proud to be a part of this wonderful Swain community. Tonight, I'm speaking on behalf of our admission and school placement programs in the context of anti-racism. Swain has always believed, as we've shared tonight, in the individual spirit of each child. This thinking, of course, extends into our work with families and the greater community. We do everything we can to ensure an inclusive admission process, approaching each situation with understanding and compassion for all family structures, lifestyles, and cultures. Our mission and vision truly guide the admission process at Swain, just as our high school placement process is rooted in helping our graduates find the best place where they can thrive beyond Swain, using their Swain Foundation as a springboard. That being said, we are constantly learning and growing and adapting to the times. We will continue to work with our families through open hearts and minds, and we will remain open to your feedback throughout our processes. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. So tonight is not meant to just be about us speaking to you, but it is meant to feel like a safe space for everyone to engage and ask questions and to express their feelings as well. So at this time, we will now be taking questions from the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. So please note you are able to submit your questions anonymously if you choose to do so. And we will do our best to answer every question, but we are also trying to be conscious of your time. You may direct your questions to a specific panelist, or it can be in general, and I will help facilitate the best person to answer it. So we do have one coming in right now. So Tyrone, this might be something that you can speak on. What would you say to a person who is wanting to ask questions but is feeling uncomfortable in asking them?
I think Dr. Webster hit it on the head when he said, "I'm uncomfortable doing this, but I must if we're talking about, you know, moving this needle at all." I think comfort is the enemy of progress, and as long as we're comfortable, we aren't really pressing ourselves to make the changes that are necessary. So I would say invite that discomfort in, and it's kind of weird because I want to say be comfortable being uncomfortable, which a lot of people say, However, I'll just say be courageous enough to be uncomfortable and do it anyway, because the questions are critical to being able to help begin our process to healing as a community and justice, right? If you don't ask the question, then how do we move forward?
I love that. Thank you. Here's one coming through. I think, Dr. Webster, this could potentially be one that you and Tyrone could maybe answer together. But once we are ready to do the work, what are some steps that we can actually take throughout our everyday, maybe specifically at Swain, or maybe this person just means for themselves, to dismantle our own biases?
So I'm happy to take a first stab at that, Tyrone, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
So I think I'm going to go back to something Tyrone said, right, which is to recognize that as human beings, we all have biases. We carry those biases around with us. There's a lot of work and research around that notion of implicit bias, right, that's out there now. And so the first is recognizing that and recognizing that sometimes those biases contradict our own self-image. So I'm going to tell you there's a test called the Implicit Association Test that is put out through Harvard. And you can take it online, and it can measure through how quickly you respond to images and words, where you stand in terms of your unconscious bias on various spectrums. So it can be age, it can be gender, it can be race, it can be any number of things. So again, leaning into that discomfort, I will tell you that I first took that test about 4 years ago, the race test, and confident that I did not hold bias towards Black people. And the test showed that I hold a moderate level of bias towards Black people. Now, that's not something that my brain is telling me consciously, but it's something that has been implanted in my brain through all the years I've lived in this country because of all the acculturation and socialization and all of that I've experienced as a white man in this country. And so that's sort of an epiphany for someone like me, right? You're thinking, wow, I didn't even imagine. I mean, I took that test confident of what I was going to end up seeing when I was done with it. And that's not where I ended up, right? So I think the first thing is to recognize that's there, and then not to be paralyzed by that, right? I'm not going to say, oh my God, I'm a horrible racist person. I'm going to say, I need then to bring that forward so I'm conscious of when that is starting to affect my words and my actions and my decisions. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, my wife will tell you I can get on a soapbox and talk for hours. So I'll try and slow down and come to a halt here. But I think that recognizing we all have bias, being willing then to bring it to the forefront so then we can deal with it consciously instead of letting it control us from an unconscious place is a good start.
Absolutely. Agreed. Agree 100%. I think to add to that, I would say listen to feedback, right? Believe Black people when they tell you how serious it is for them, right? Believe Black people, believe them and say, you know what, I believe you. And that will begin to change you. Just to tell someone you believe them can really start to change the chemical balances in your body that has always taught you to not believe those folks, right? Just speaking it into existence is something that I believe helps people to really start to shift their mindset. I also think that recognizing this idea of confirmation bias is real. So when you go into situations and you've already had this kind of preconceived notion about who people are, and no matter what, all you're looking for is the confirmation that you're right. So regardless of everything that they may do or may have shown you that dismantles your bias, if it doesn't fit into what you want to confirm, you ignore it. So I would say to coin your confirmation bias and say, you know what, I was looking for confirmation when I came into this room, and I ignored everything else that I was shown because I needed to just confirm that I was right. So I think that's something that people need to coin and to own, and then to start to figure out how to break that down, right? How to take a step back. And I think Dr. Webster hit on it. The other thing I would say is normalize Black existence on a daily basis. Normalize the existence of Black people as human beings, right? I think once you begin to do that and see Black folks as people, you will begin to connect more. And what I mean as some steps to that is I mentioned something simple as a movie, right? And the reason why I mentioned a movie is because I think the power of whiteness in America stems from the passive way it is handed to us. It isn't all about aggression. It isn't all about, be like white folks. It's just the reoccurring images we see of white people on a daily basis. And that's for everybody in the United States of America. How we see white people in their existence as just human beings. We see them angry, we see them happy, we see them sad, we see them mad, we see them pregnant, we see them divorced, we see them married. We know white people in our country. So when you begin to have that mindset for people of color, and you begin to know their wholeness, right, in their totality, then you begin to humanize them and shift the way you approach people of color. So I would say welcome them into your comfortable space. Welcome them into your leisure space. Welcome them into your academics, and that will begin to shift how you view and interact and recognize Black people as humans and not just part of our decorations and our designs, right? Our extras in our movie.
Can I follow on with that just for a second? So, because you're making me think. So in a school setting, one way that happens is you look at the books you have in the library, the books you have in the classroom libraries, starting from the earliest age that children are looking at books.
Absolutely.
And you make sure that we don't just have an image that we present in school of African Americans in the context of slavery and civil rights and racism, because then that makes that the story of what it means to be Black in America, right? And it's not that that's unimportant. We need to get there, but before our children get there, before our students get there, they need to have what Tyrone's talking about, an image of Black people and brown people and every person in America as just being normal folks, families that go to the beach, families that have a little problem with the dog and they have to figure out how to solve it. Families, we have all these children's books that show all these things happening with families. Well, so a lot of those we need to make sure have African-American families featured and all types of families.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about racism, that's where my focus is, but all types of families.
Armistead, there's actually a great question that is a perfect segue to what you were just talking about.
Sure.
This person asked, will the school review its history and civics curriculum for the middle school? Black people have been a part of our American history for over 400 years, but often do not show up in every story, and this seems like a good opportunity.
So I'm going to say I think that's a great idea, and I would like to be part of working collaboratively with folks here to look at our curriculum from top to bottom, right? And that's not something that, snap your fingers and it happens, but I also don't want to be slow about it, right? You're talking about Brown versus Board of Education, and part of the history that I didn't learn for a long time was that phrase, all deliberate speed, right? It took a long time for many school districts to implement the court's ruling. So we'll pursue that with great speed, not all deliberate speed, but that's absolutely something that needs to happen.
May I also say, just very, very briefly, that our current humanities structure for middle school provides a phenomenal opportunity for us to have these kinds of discussions using literature that is appropriate and shows the whole picture as opposed to a picture through a narrow lens.
We also have some questions, and this could really be for anyone, but a lot of people are asking, where would you start when talking to your child about this? Specifically, what age do you think is appropriate to start talking to them about it, and how do you go about having this conversation with your child? So Tyrone, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can start. I think there's so many different ways to do it. I'm trying to think of the way that makes sense for folks. So this is the first thing I believe in terms of having that conversation with your kids, right? Part of not having that conversation with your kids and still teaching them about the expansive nature of Black folks, as we are talking about race, right, is by, again, bringing those folks into your living room and into your space, right? So giving your child, your son or daughter, different opportunities to engage with Blackness as their experts, for them to learn from Black people, right? For them to learn about Black people, for them to read a book and say, my favorite author is, and they name someone Black, and you're like, wow, when did that happen? Well, Swain's school books have all types of people. And I really resonated with this one. So I think that's one way you begin to teach students about the existence of Black folks, right? So it doesn't have to be anything where you're sitting them down and saying, we need to have the talk. But there's ways that you can teach your son, your daughter, whoever about race and how to appreciate everyone simply by just giving them options of people who don't look like them, right? The way I've been given options of folks who don't look like me constantly through my education. I think the other thing is being able to have conversations like this when something happens nationally, right? Students, my daughter sees the news, right? She watches the news, or she reads the paper, or she's asking questions about what's going on with this. And rather than turn it off or shy away from it, I attack the problem head on. I say, baby girl, this is what's happening in our world, right? There is a history that has been established in our world, and I'm not going to walk away from it, because if I think I can have a conversation with her about why the guy who stole the fish in Finding Nemo was wrong and took Nemo to his fish tank, right? If I can have a conversation about that and why that was wrong, I need to be able to have a conversation about why the treatment of Black folks are wrong, right? So I can have this fantasy conversation and teach her a life lesson, but then when a real life lesson shows up, I avoid it. So my belief is that parents already have the skill and the talent to have these difficult conversations, right? They just aren't comfortable having conversations surrounding race. So it's not about me teaching you a new skill. It's to say, hey, the same conversation you had about Jafar and Princess Jasmine, I need you to now shift that to real life about what's going on in the United States of America. And I think parents can do that if they're willing to do it. So it's hard for me to really answer that question because I do it so naturally. And much like whiteness, when you do it so naturally, it's hard to define and describe, right?
I love that answer. Would anyone else like to touch on that, or should I keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. So I actually have two people that have asked this question, and it's something I have wondered myself. Is the term African-American incorrect? Should we be saying Black? I know this sounds silly, but truly I'm just not sure and always want to be respectful. And another person also said, what is the best word to use when referring to a person of color? I hesitate to say Black because I don't want to offend.
And let me, and anyone can answer this, right? But let me tell you that this is what stops our conversations from moving forward. It's because we have forced people to walk on eggshells, and then we challenge them to have conversations like this. But if we have people walking on eggshells about what word to use, then how are we ever going to be able to really crack those eggs and start getting into real conversation? But we have people scared to speak and use terminology and learn. We're never going to be able to get to a really good conversation. So I'll start out with that. The second thing I will say is rule number one, Black people are dynamic and expansive, right? So there are people who prefer African-American, there are people who prefer Black. You got to dive in and figure out what that person prefers. That's really it, because there's no silver bullet. And I think trying to tie a silver bullet to it is what really cripples this entire, I can't even use that term, what really stifles this entire, movement. Is because folks are looking for terms, and you have people saying, don't say that, and someone else saying, yeah, say that. And you're like, well, which one should I use? I'm looking for the silver bullet, and there isn't one. The only thing that dismantles this is to act and to engage and figure it out along the way.
Love that. Dr. Webster, I think I have a great question for you.
Okay.
When we're teaching, will we teach inclusiveness or anti-racism or both? And can you describe how you teach the differences between the two?
So my short answer is, I think we need to be teaching both. And I'm not sure I can describe the differences between the two. When I said that I was pretty new to using the term anti-racist, I wasn't kidding. I have come to this pretty recently in terms of realizing that it's not good enough for me just to not be racist, but that I need to be in my own life and in how I outwardly face the world, promoting an anti-racist approach to how we live our lives as a society. So I think that's something we're going to have to explore as teachers and define collaboratively with parents and figure out. But I think it's a both and, not an either or.
Definitely. So we have a lot of people that are asking something very similar, but our beloved Mrs. Akers, I think, really summed it up beautifully. She says, I've been trying hard to think of what I can do as a white teacher with the responsibility of children in my care. I've been teaching since 1970 and have always thought I was seeing each child as a child with enormous potential. I now realize I have so far to go. Starting from birth, I am feeling that we teachers of all colors need to grow our efforts to support opportunities for children of color. Can you give us some leadership on how we can make a real change to move from the center? That's a beautiful question, Glenda. Tyrone, would you like to take that one?
Let me just hear the end of it one more time.
Yeah, so can you give us some leadership on how we can make a real change to move from the center?
Mm-hmm. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have to be, intentional and not passive, right? So I think part of moving from the center is recognizing where we've fallen short, right? So I think we do a wonderful job at creating these excuses that ultimately help us remain comfortable, right? So there may be this thought that, Swain doesn't have a diverse array of teachers. Like, how are we not doing it? And Swain leadership may come back and say, well, we can't find teachers, right? And that's comfortable. That's a comfortable excuse because it doesn't really require action. So I think what a better response will be, we're going to do it. And we're looking at different ways, and we've partnered with this school, that school, and we have a program coming up to where we're raising teachers and bringing teachers in to become Swain, teachers in leadership. But the easy part of not doing that is saying we can't find them because we're falling back onto our comfort and what we always do. So I think we have to be very, very intentional about what we're trying to create. We have to create standards and we have to create goals that we're seeking to reach and hold ourselves accountable for those. The same way we say if we had testing metrics, we would not fall short on our testing metrics. We will do all we can to ensure our students get the grades that they need for us to be great in our testing metrics, right? If we're measuring the success of our students, we have to have that same energy. We have to be just as eager to be anti-racist as we are to meeting the metrics of testing, right? And we never find excuses when we're in that space. We don't find excuses as to why. We look for solutions. We're always solution focused when it comes to making sure our students are leaving our school prepared, right? We don't settle for those excuses. And when we're doing this work with our students and trying to open our spaces in our classrooms and make sure we are seeing each one of them as they are in their beauty and their innocence, really, we have to be just as intentional in carrying that torch forward and engaging with them, right? It's easy and it's comfortable for a teacher to look at a student of color and say, well, he just wants to be alone, and I'm just going to leave him alone, because there's a discomfort in trying to learn the skills to engage with a student who may be disconnected from who I am visibly as a white teacher. Right. So we have to kind of overcome that discomfort and say, I'm going to engage with the students because the student deserves me. Right. And I deserve to be a part of the student's life. And we have to actively do that. So I believe a lot of teachers want to do it, but there's this fear. Right. And we have to overcome that and say, I have to serve this student as I would serve the student if they were failing these tests that my job depended on. Right.
Yeah. I know, Tyrone, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but just speaking on behalf of Swain's faculty, that last year you had started to work with us on just recognizing our own personal biases, which you don't even realize they can just be there subconsciously and can creep into your teaching and can actually direct your teaching.
Yeah.
And so that was, I know a lot of Swain teachers felt the same way, that it was really kind of a wake-up call to just allow yourself to recognize these are the biases that I grew up with, and they can definitely affect the way I teach and therefore can affect my students. So I think even just the work that you had started to do with us last year has been, I know for me personally, and I can speak for a lot of teachers, very helpful.
No, I appreciate it.
Can I just add a little something to that from an education point of view, which is, so one of the things that we understand and believe and place a lot of value on in education is developmentally appropriate program, right? Understanding that children go through developmental milestones and they need to sort of, they need to reach this one before they get to that one. And there's, and we look for those and we encourage those and we support those. And I think it's important for us to realize that those developmental milestones can be shown in different ways, and we're used to seeing them through the lens that we grew up with, or that
Yes.
we were taught in, right? So
Yes.
one of my favorite examples of this, and I'm forgetting her name right now, but this book by an author who writes about this, and she was with the folks up in Alaska, the Inuit up in Alaska, and she was trying to get kids to do the developmental task, at the right age of organizing things, and they couldn't organize stuff. And she thought, these kids are just lagging; they're developmentally behind. But then she realized that what she was asking them to organize were forks and knives and spoons, right, and put them in the right places. And it wasn't until she was with this family, and she went out to where they kept all the equipment and tools they used for hunting and fishing and trapping. And the same age kid was in there organizing that perfectly, right? That was what they knew. That was their frame of reference. And so that's a faraway example, but I think it's an example that's important for us to remember that as important as those developmental milestones are, they may manifest in different ways. There may be a cultural component for how those are going to show up, and we shouldn't penalize a kid because they're not showing that milestone in the way we're expecting right away. It's also about the use of language, right? Different households, different cultures, different traditions use language differently. So if I'm used as a teacher of young children, I may be used to holding up an object and saying, "What is this?" And I know the child knows it. I'm just trying to get them used to this sort of back and forth. But there may be a child who's grown up in a house where nobody ever says, "What is this?" when you already know the answer, right? That's a foolish question to ask. So they just look at you blankly, like, "Why are you asking me that stupid question?" They're too polite to say it out loud, right? So you have to recognize that maybe there's a language component going on here. And even though what makes sense to you, you'd have to figure out what makes sense to the child, right?
Absolutely. Agreed. I think we teach as we learn, right?
Yeah.
Like, the way I learn best is how most likely I'm going to begin to teach folks, right? And we're so centered on ourselves. And I say we because I do it as well, and I'm trying to overcome that. But I'm centered with myself, right? So I'm going to give information out the way I receive information. But when I become better skilled at my craft, I learn that other people digest information differently and receive it differently. So I begin to develop skills to deliver it in ways that other people may take it. I know teachers typically have, some training around different teaching styles and ways to connect with students in their learning. But there's one thing, I think Mrs. Camilla Green, who's one of she's one of my heroes, my local heroes. She always talks about discourse 1 and discourse 2 in education. And discourse 1 is what happens predominantly at most schools, right? The question is, what's wrong with the students and how do we get them on board to do what we are trying to do here, right? So how do we get these students to adapt to us? And that's discourse 1. What she says is discourse 2 is saying this student has all the potential in the world. What's wrong with us and our systems that we've created that hasn't brought that potential out, or that hasn't brought that potential out, right? So what is it about our systems and our structures that continues to stifle this student's growth rather than thinking about what's wrong with this student and why aren't they catching up to what we're doing? So it's more about how are we being creative? How are we being, skilled? How are we being more intelligent about our delivery systems and our structures that are in place that are preventing the student's brilliance versus we're the brilliant ones and they need to catch up to what we're doing. If we're truly brilliant, we'll figure out how to bring them along and rearrange the structures to get their brilliance out.
Love that. I think we have time for one more question. We have so many great ones coming in. And again, we know this is only the start of the conversation. We will be submitting some forms for your feedback where you can continue to ask questions and reach out to any of the panelists tonight. But one of the questions that seems to be repetitive is, hold on, let me find it. This has kind of been answered a little bit tonight, but there's just a lot of people that are asking, how can we manage messages that are coming from the media to our kids that are biased, maybe even unintentionally, but our kids are receiving it? And how do you talk to them about that or help to filter it or manage it? So I think Armistead and Tyrone, you can both answer this one.
Go ahead, Doc.
So I have two thoughts to start with. Thanks, Tyrone.
Yeah,
two thoughts to start with. One is certainly when your children are younger, right, you have so much more control over what media they're consuming.
Right.
So manage it directly at that point. Don't just park them in front of the screen without knowing what they're going to be seeing, even if that means sometimes you have to preview it, right?
Mhm.
But I think much more importantly, because we all know that sooner or later they're going to go out into that wild world of all the media that's available to them, social media, internet, online media, everything that's out there. And we have to equip them, this is parents and school together, right? We
Mhm.
have to equip them with the skills to see something and say, wait a second, what the heck is this about, right? This, to bring an analytical skill, an empathetic sense, a knowledge base to take what's coming at them and, you know, either know I shouldn't be looking at this, I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm looking at this, but I'm really questioning what, you know, what reason this was created, why was this created? Or I'm looking at this and wow, I think this is something that I can learn from, right? So that there are skills that, and these are life skills, right? This isn't something new. It's just that the media environment we're in now, the online environment kids grow up in now, is so in your face and 24-hour and beyond our control as parents, which is hugely scary, right?
Mhm.
My kids were born in 90 and 91, and I'm going to tell you, I feel fortunate that they came of age. I won't say before the internet era, but they were at the beginning of it, and so this was less of an issue for us raising our personal children.
Mhm. And I would add, I've never sat my daughter down to show her how to vacuum the house, right? I've never sat her down and said, look, this is how you do it. You go back and forth and you know, pick something up. And if it looks like it goes in a vacuum, throw it back down and vacuum over it. I've never done that, but she's learned how to vacuum. I buy her a vacuum, she grabs it and she does everything that I do. So when I talk about being intentional, if you begin to recognize your biases, if you begin to, you know, take that implicit bias test, if you begin to listen to Black folks when they tell you things are racist, if you begin to kind of listen to the feedback that people give you, pick your head up and look around and see, you know, where your comfort spots are. If you begin to do that, then you could be much more intentional about preventing your child from swallowing that pill that you swallow for so long. But you have to work on yourself first. There's no way you're going to have a conversation with your child if you have yet to work on your own biases, because all you're doing is preaching to them more biases, or you have the inability to teach them anything differently because you haven't even looked at yourself first. So I believe for parents wanting to do this work, it's like when you talk to teachers and you're like, so what's going on with you all? How are you all doing? And the moment you ask them that question, the first thing they do is start talking about students. And you're like, no, I'm talking about your relationship as teachers. But they deflect so easily right back down to the students because it alleviates them from having to deal with the stuff inside of them. Because we can talk about the students and we can all agree on that, right? So what parents are asking is for this information that they can deflect from them and then just feed it to the student. Hey, I'm just going to talk to my daughter about that. I'm not going to change my ways. But once you start to change your own ways, you're going to begin to shift how your son, how your daughter, how your child watches TV, what they're paying attention to, and how they consume that information. But you have to be intentional about changing yourself, and that's going to filter to how you teach your son or daughter how to vacuum, right? And how to understand.
You reminded me of that old thing, right? That do as I say, not as I do, right?
Right.
Children watch us. Children, they know, and so no matter what you say, if you're not modeling that behavior, if they're going to see that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. We have so many more questions that we did not get to. We are just trying to be conscious of everyone's time. We will be ending tonight's program. However, we know that the work and our conversation has truly just begun. So thank you to everyone who joined the conversation and helped in creating our first Let's Talk event. I know that there will be many more. As always, we are also proud to be a part of the Swain community, and we will continue to enact change through our dialogue, our learning, and everyday action within our own teaching. So remember to visit swain.org if you have any other questions. We will also be releasing a Google form for you to submit feedback and to watch our conversation again if you choose to do so. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Tyrone, Dr. Webster, and Karen Matan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to have you.
Stay safe.
You as well.